The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're delighted you're joining us here today. My name is Vanessa Morandeira, and I would like to welcome you very warmly to today's webinar titled The Key to Confidence, Less Becomes More. Please allow me to begin with a few house rules. As you've probably noticed, you are all muted. This is so we can avoid any background noise. You will definitely have the opportunity to ask questions. As you can see, there is a chat function available to you. Please type your questions you may have and send them to us. We will ask our speaker questions from our audience at the end of the presentation. Now, please let me introduce our speaker, Ellen Karp. She's the founder of OEKO International Inc., a consumer research and consulting company with clients in Canada, Europe, and the United States. OEKO is known for creative explorations of consumers' thoughts and dreams and their relation into groundbreaking brands and products. A former cultural anthropologist, she's known also for her understanding and interpretation of global sociocultural trends. Ellen, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and I'm very pleased to present more findings, new findings from the OEKO-TEX Key to Confidence study. I'm going to speak fairly quickly because I have a lot of material here, and I think it's actually very important and interesting material. So I'm not going to read everything that you see on this slide, but if I go too quickly, please do send a message to Vanessa, and she'll send a message to me saying, slow down. So I'd like to begin. I think some of you might have been at our earlier webinars, and so that you know that OEKO-TEX celebrated its 25th anniversary last year. And as part of that anniversary, they commissioned groundbreaking research. And it was groundbreaking because it was the first that really, in a very intense way, questioned consumers around the world about their attitudes towards sustainability, and particularly textile sustainability. People had interviewed the trade many times, but not consumers. So what we did was a 25-minute online survey. That's a very long one. It was done in 10 countries. You can see the countries at the side of the screen, with over 11,000 people. And just in brief, who were they? They were all ages 18 plus, and they were the key shoppers and decision makers for clothing and home textiles in their households. What I'm going to do today is do a quick review of some of the key findings from the earlier presentations that will shed light on what is coming today that's new. And I'll do that fairly quickly because I'm very eager to share with you the new data, which really answers the question, will people stop buying as many products? And what will that mean? So what we learned was that climate change is indeed taken very, very seriously to consumers, to people in every country. Over 80% consider it a real and very serious problem. When we asked what was bothering people most out of a long list, it was the first, second, occasionally third choice in most countries. And 7 in 10 people said that they were committed to living a more sustainable, environmentally responsible lifestyle. A lot of people, some said very strongly, some somewhat, but it was still 7 in 10. So what emerged was what I call a new consumer mantra. People had the opportunity to write in comments, and they wrote in a lot of comments, over 40,000 in fact. And one of the comments that emerged most often was, I want to do the right thing. And they used the word responsible. You can see it in the quotes on the right. They want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, clearly. So I'm going to switch gears already a little bit. I'm going to talk about food for a moment because this will put things in perspective a little bit. And occasionally today I'm going to compare the textile industry to the food industry. So about 15 years ago, people, often parents, began to worry because the food supply seemed compromised. People were getting sick from E. coli, and people were reading a lot of articles, as you can see, saying that there was growth in autism, ADHD, allergies among children, and that really makes people worried. So changes to the food industry started as people demanded products that were healthier, more wholesome, and sustainable, because they realized that healthy food only grows from a healthy earth. So, often the impetus was from parents, because parents would say, new parents would say, oh my gosh, people told me I have to eat better. And then I wanted to use safer products, lotions that I rubbed on the child's skin, etc. So the desire for wholesome, healthy, sustainable products started with food, and then often it went to personal care, to things that were absorbed, and then to things like home cleaning supplies and other products that people thought might be a little bit toxic. So back 10 years ago, when I started interviewing what we then called green consumers, consumers who were interested in sustainability, we talk about all of this, and then I would say, well, what about your clothes? So what about their textiles? And at that time, particularly in North America, they would look at me and say, clothes? What's wrong with my clothes? People really, even the really, really most sustainable consumers, didn't have any idea that there was any issue with clothes or with the textile industry. So as you recall from the last presentation, the Key to Confidence study, one of the findings was that things are starting to change as people become more aware of the impact of the textile industry, because we are seeing it reported more in all kinds of media. And as a result, we're seeing heightened concerns about harmful substances, certainly heightened concerns about textile workers. When people wrote in comments, many were about deep concerns, particularly from Europe, and heightened concerns about the environmental impact of the industry. Now, when you look at the manufacturing countries, which in our case was India and China, the concerns were already major. They are already major. So for example, when you ask people, when you give them a list of product types and say, are you extremely, very, somewhat, not very, or not at all concerned about harmful substances in these products? As you might know, we disguise the fact that we're talking about textiles for a good part of the survey. In India and China, an average of 72 people said they were extremely or very concerned. Parents, about 90%. Also, when you give them a list of industries and say which are the worst polluters, in India and China, it emerged as the third worst polluter after energy and cars. And concerns are growing elsewhere about the industry. So our message was, get ready, get ready. Now we're going to start with, I'm going to start sharing the new material. And we're going to look at it in three different ways. First of all, will people soon and in the future change the way they purchase clothes and other textiles? Will textiles slowly become like the food industry, which changed completely? The food industry at all levels looks completely differently now than it did a decade ago. Will people's relationship with clothing will these changes be permanent, or is this going to be something that comes and goes as a short-lived trend or as a fad? And finally, what are the implications for manufacturers, brands, retailers, and others in the industry? So let's start. First of all, I'm going to share with you, bear with me, I'm going to share with you some key data which will put this in perspective, because we did include data about will people buy less, fewer textiles. And I'd like to share that with you, and then we'll look at the question of why they answered the way they did. So what we do, as you might know, is check people's attitudes, what they're thinking, and then what they're doing. So I'm going to start by talking about what people are thinking. And again, we didn't ask people questions outright. We don't want to make it obvious because people already answer with the best side of themselves. So we want to make sure that they're answering as close to reality as possible. And we do have ways of checking that. But one of the early statements that was included among many statements was, if people purchased fewer consumer goods, it would help combat climate change. So in other words, do people associate their purchases of general consumer goods with climate change? How many people, what proportion? 54% of people globally associate the purchase of consumer goods with climate change. That is a very big number. Now, it's interesting also to look at who was most likely to say this. And of course, we can look at the data from many different perspectives. So if you look at the little icons on the right, I'm going to start on the right-hand side, and these were groups of people around the world who agreed with this statement. So on the right, I apologize, I know there's many Europeans. The castle represents Western Europe, and that included Germany, Switzerland, and Spain. And Western Europe emerges constantly in this survey as particularly interested in less purchasing. Then we have frequent clothing shoppers, people who shop for clothes more than once a month. And that's very interesting because this statement was about fewer consumer goods. Then we have parents, and the next icon beside, which looks like somebody delivering the post, the mail, but actually represents millennials. They're very important because millennials are becoming parents, and that's the future. So anywhere that you see that millennials and parents agree strongly with something, it's something to pay attention to. And then very often, women who were shopping slightly more for clothes than men in the survey also were slightly more likely than men to agree with this statement. So what about their actions? It's well known that behavior is harder to follow. Behavioral change is slower than attitudinal change. It's hard to change behaviors. So elsewhere in the survey, we asked if they if to live more sustainably, they have cut back on the number of consumer goods that they purchase. What percent? 35%. This is a lot of people. If you think of a room with 10 people, 3.5 people say, I've cut back on the number of consumer goods. Out of 11,000 people, you're looking at 3,000 to 4,000 people who say that. So who, again, who's most likely? Well, people in Switzerland, Brazil, and Germany reported that. Females, millennials in 2 countries, interestingly enough, in China and in the US. And then we had a group that was made up of those who said, I'm committed to living sustainably, but there were other factors that we introduced. So this was about a third of the people interviewed, and they're the most sustainably oriented, and 1 in 2 of them has started cutting back. But does the aspiration to buy less and buying less, does that extend to clothes and other textile products? Before, we were just talking about general consumer goods. Let's narrow it in. So I'm going to start with 2 of the statements that we included in the survey about clothing. And by the way, much of this presentation is about clothing, but home textiles could be included in it just as well. The findings for home textiles were very similar to the findings about clothes. So people in my country tend to have too many clothes. This is about quantity. Next, we'll go to quality. So how many people agree with that statement? Well, almost 1 in 2 people say that people in my country have too many clothes. So who's saying that? Well, as you can see, people in what we could call the more consumption-based countries like Australia, Canada, and the US, it's 47% there. In Switzerland, 2 in 3 people say people in my country have too many clothes, also higher in Germany and in Japan, and among females. Those people who are living more sustainably, 57%. The next statement that I'm going to share with you does have to do with quality, and it has to do with disposable clothing. Some clothes today don't cost very much, but they also don't last very long. Again, here we go. Make a prediction, 48%. So 48% of people are saying there's something about durability and quality of inexpensive clothes. We pay a price for them. And here is what is really important. It was higher among people who shop at fast fashion and or at discount or mass channels. Now, a little note about fast fashion. The people most likely in our sample to shop at fast fashion were the millennials. So millennials are there. So please keep that in mind because as I said before, millennials are very important to this presentation. They're also more likely to live in Western Europe and Australia. And in the US, it was higher than the global average. And in the US, there was a high level of people who were shopping at discount or mass. About 3 in 4 people were shopping at discount. So this is important for anybody involved in that channel selling into the United States. Again, females more than males, and millennials in many of the countries, as you can see. But are they walking the talk, so to speak? Are they reducing the number of new clothes that they buy? So, to live more sustainably, I have reduced the number of new clothes I buy. How many people? Again, 34%, 3 to 4,000 of 11,000. Say they've reduced the number of new clothes, not to have less clothes because their closets were too full, but in order to live more sustainably. So again, people in Brazil, India, and Switzerland were particularly likely to be buying new clothes, but also, again, females, parents, and in China, consumers under age 55. Of those who are committed to a sustainable lifestyle, it's higher, it's 44%. Of course, answering this is related to how many clothes you actually have and to your lifestyle requirements. So on that note, let's look at millennials for a second. Millennials are starting out in many ways in their life. They're starting university, they're 22 to 37 years old. They're starting jobs, they're starting families, and so those are all touch points where people need new clothes. So that gets factored in, but still 1 in 3 consumers say, yes, I'm buying fewer clothes to be more sustainable. And in the US, those consumers who qualified as committed to sustainable living, almost 1 in 2. This is a challenge to the industry because it's suggesting that the importance of quality might be growing over quantity. We might be looking, and I think we are looking, at a growing decommoditization of the apparel industry. And we're looking at concerns about disposable fashion. There's a picture of coffee pods there because I don't know if you've been following this, but due to consumer pressure, the coffee makers have had to introduce recyclable coffee pods. And is that a cautionary tale? Will consumers push, once they know more about the industry, for better textiles, quote unquote, better? So in an environment where quality might start to be more important, what will people want? Well, I've kind of answered that question there. I say drum roll because when we prepared the survey, this was one of the things that I was most interested in, and it's actually I think it's the most important statement in the presentation, which is, in the future, I'd like to have fewer but better quality new clothes. So, how many people? 38%. I found this number to be very high. And the way I put it is that if you think of yourself on a bus or on a subway, and there are 10 people in the bus, 4 of them say, in the future, I'd like to have fewer but better quality new clothes. So we might indeed be looking at a situation where less is becoming more in textiles. And again, who's going to want fewer but better quality clothes? Millennials and parents. This again is important because millennials are the leading generation now, and they are becoming parents, and they're teaching a new generation. Frequent clothes shoppers were more likely to answer positively, to agree with this statement. People who shop at luxury, people who shop at eco-friendly clothes, we can expect that, but also people who shop frequently at fast fashion retailers. And as I mentioned before, a lot of millennials are shopping for fast fashion, and so that's understandable, but there it is. And in terms of the people committed to living sustainably, it's almost 1 in 2. So this is a factor. This is something to really pay attention to. I'm going to take a breath as we move to the next section of the presentation, which asks if there's a change to the way people think about acquiring clothes, as the data indicates. Will it be long-lasting as for food? Will it keep evolving in that direction? Or might it just be something that becomes something that's done for a little while and fades away? I'd be very curious to be able to have a conversation with all of you who work in the industry about that. But I think it will be a lasting change. I think that the industry will slowly transform. And there are 2 reasons that I think so. The first is sociological. The second has to do again with exposure to facts about the industry. So I'm going to focus on the sociology of deconsumption, particularly in this presentation, and I'm going to focus on millennials. Now, if there are millennials out there who are getting tired, who are listening, who are getting tired of being spoken about, I apologize, but I'd like to look at millennials from a different perspective, and that is their values and their relationship to material objects, and some lifestyle considerations as well. So I've mentioned some of this, first in terms of their influence. Their ages 22 to 37. That's a very important period of life because that's when you really set yourself up as an adult and you move into the adult portion of your life. They're the largest age segment. Just back to that point, it's a period when you might be going to school, you're getting a job, you're possibly starting a family. So there are all these transition points. And many of them, by the way, as I said, require new wardrobes, but they're increasingly becoming leaders. Now, you'll notice that it says in millennial fashion. What's millennial fashion of leadership? Well, I think we all know that millennials are known for being collaborative, non-hierarchical, but I want to make the point that in many aspects of their lives, this is important to clothing, they don't judge in a hierarchy, in a vertical way. Their lifestyles are lateral or horizontal. So they're not necessarily status-driven, hierarchical, as human behavior has been for a long time now. Most importantly, they're having children. So half of the millennials in our survey had children ages 12 and under. Why is that important? Well, they are teaching the next generation who will then teach the next generation. So they're really influencing the future. Values. By and large, overall, the millennials have very clear and non-compromising values. And some of the things that they value are experience more than things, nature, the outdoors, and they were raised under the specter of climate change. So sustainable values and sustainable lifestyles are important and often factor into their purchase decisions. And I'm sure you've read this. This is reported very often, and it certainly emerged during the survey. So during the survey, when you looked at millennials compared to Generation X, but particularly compared to baby boomers, the millennials were most likely to say that humans are responsible for climate change. They were most likely of any generation to purchase organic foods and personal care. They're checking more for animal testing, and they've of course grown up with certified food. And so when we asked them, we gave them a list of different types of products. This was before they knew that the survey was focusing on textiles. We gave them a list of products and said, would you be interested in knowing that that these products have been certified to be safe from harmful substances and socially and environmentally responsibly made? And have you purchased any? Millennials in all cases were both more interested and more likely to have purchased certified products. They were also, now they're not all communicating with political or industry leaders, but about 22%, about 22% said that they were. And that's why I talk about a quiet activism. That's a photograph, by the way, from Australia. Tell future generations it was good for the economy. Because they were much more likely than others to communicate with political or industry leaders. So now this is even more relevant to the subject today. What about stuff? What about their relationships to things in general? Well, what I use to describe it is living small. What do I mean and why? In some parts of the world, notably for millennials, in many parts of the world, in fact, they prefer, at least until they have families, to live in urban settings. That's expensive. So many are living in apartments, condos, flats that are small. They're 300 to 500 square feet, which is 30 to 40 square meters, which means they don't have room for a lot of stuff. They don't have storage. They have to be more careful about what they buy. So the other important word for today is curated. You see this word all the time. I hear it all the time when millennials speak to me. And of course, it means that they're very selective. They're very choosy. When they buy something, they're very deliberate about it because they want the things that are important to them, to have meaning to them and reflect their values and their aesthetics. And their benchmarks for aesthetics tend to be things that are artisanal or crafted. Think about beer, for example, and what's happened to the beer industry. So they want their things to reflect their values. There's two other points here. One is on the left. Because of these small spaces, there's a whole industry that's been devoted now, that's been created for producing multifunctional everything. And it started with furniture. So they have furniture that might be a sofa, it might be a table at another time, and then it becomes a bed. Minimalism is there because a movement started in the United States called minimalism. They don't all belong, but what I like to say about this is that other generations would not have created a movement like this. Baby boomers certainly not. So as I mentioned, I'm going to compare the textile industry to the food industry, and I work a great deal in the food industry because it's going to be predictive of what happens to their clothing culture. So in terms of food, millennials are really in the forefront of wanting and living with healthy, wholesome, organic for many, non-toxic, non-processed, pure, they would say sometimes, foods. They value foods that are artisanal or crafted or direct from farmers, authentic. Their food culture is democratized, which is the word I used before. So for example, there's a picture of cheese on the left. About 10 years ago, I was doing some work about cheese in the United States and fancy cheese. And it was about brie cheese, which people generally saved for company and had for special occasions. And I was talking to millennials and I said, do you buy brie cheese? And they said, oh yeah, we go to the supermarket once a week and buy a bun and put brie in it and have lunch. This is an example of democratization. So there's not such a thing as this is really fancy and this is every day. That's starting to go away, and that will apply to clothing, their clothing culture. They're also, the next picture, living small. They like sharing, they're collaborative, the rise of small plate meals. Food is an experience, but on the right, they're also skeptical. And they're skeptical of claims like natural or organic if they're not backed up. What about their clothes culture? So very similar in many ways, moving in the same direction that the food industry moved over a period of time. So first of all, we all know it's a very cultural clothes culture. It's largely based on what used to be athleisure, but the athleisure wardrobe and attributes have moved into many other types of clothing, so that now, this is on the right-hand side of the page, there are fewer distinct wearing occasions. So what you wear to work might be what you wear in the evening. There's not that degree of categories within clothing culture for many millennials. So therefore, they can have smaller wardrobes, which means that there's room for heightened quality. Just one word about athleisure, which I'm hoping there's a new word for it soon because it's way beyond athletics and leisure at this point, is that they're looking for comfort, but this is not the comfort, baby boomer comfort, which was kind of loose and not attractive. This is a new classic. The new classic is comfortable, meaning fluid, sleek, and stylish. Also, they're taking a curated approach to retail. So when you go into boutiques that are very millennial, sometimes you see about 20 or 30 items hanging, very limited because they're curating at retail as well. But I want to make the point on the bottom that this is, on the right-hand side, the last point, this is a life stage that requires a lot of new wardrobes. I've mentioned that. Even when they start having families and they're starting their careers, they don't have a lot of money. So fast fashion is important. Therefore, you have both fast fashion and the curated retail sensibility or approach coexisting. So what about their views about the textile industry itself? Well, millennials versus people in other generations are more knowledgeable about the textile industry and its impact. So when we measured their awareness of certain facts, they had higher awareness. And when we asked, how much do you know about the way clothes are made, they said that they knew more than people in other generations. They were more likely globally to say the textile industry is one of the most serious polluters. They were more aware of individual facts about the industry's pesticide, chemical use, water use, waste, and environmental impact. And when we asked about eco-friendly clothes or home textiles, their answers were more positive. They only had good things to say, and they also were the most likely to say, I'm willing to pay a premium for eco-friendly clothing, for example. Also, as you notice, they were the most likely generation to say purchasing fewer consumer goods can help combat climate change and in the future, I'd like to have fewer but better quality clothing. The next reason that I think that changes to the textile industry will evolve in a direction quite similar to what happened to the food industry is quite simple. It's the fact that people are becoming more aware. And in this survey, we were able to measure that heightening awareness is a call to action to people. So at the end of the survey, we gave them 10 facts. You might remember if you heard the previous presentation, 10 very well-established facts that you read in legitimate news sources about the industry's impact, like it's the second most polluting industry after oil, the water use, the waste, etc. And we wanted to find out how much people knew and also its effect. So just in terms of what they knew, people in manufacturing countries did know more. Millennials worldwide knew slightly more. But people the world over were more aware. If they were aware of anything, it had to do with textile workers. But the main thing was that they were shocked. And when you read comments from this point forward, the word shocked came up always, and the word I have to do something. It's that taking responsibility. So we gave them a lot of different options as a result of learning the facts. I will do ABC, and 45% said that they would look more carefully at their brands, at the brands they buy. Brands are really important to all of this. Also, a lot of people, this isn't just millennials, said I'm going to buy eco-friendly clothes. 90% said yes, I will, or maybe I'll pay more for them. But 52% of people said I will pay more for them. And once people were exposed to these facts, the differences you had between the types of countries started to diminish. So people in China and Brazil and the United States and Australia and Spain and Germany were answering very similarly from this point forward. So the big question here is, as a result of learning these facts, in the future, I'll be more likely to buy fewer new clothes. Again, 4 in 10. That's not the majority, but it's showing signs of change and movement. Again, if we think of the bus with 10 people, 4 of them say, yes, learning about the industry makes me think about buying fewer new clothes. Again, another strong indicator of, in the future, less becoming more. So who's most likely to buy fewer new clothes? Well, females. It so happened that people in 4 countries had higher levels, and that was Japan, India, Australia, and Canada. 1 in 2 people who are living more sustainably, but in the US, and I'm calling out the US for one reason, and that is that this is the country, this is the culture that created the consumer society. So if we see change in the United States, it's something to pay attention to. So another deep breath, and I'm going to share with you what I think it all means. This, by the way, a lot of you might not recognize or know who this is. This is Bob Dylan, the folk singer. His first album was called The Times They Are Changing, and that's what I think. I think the times are changing. Is it time for panic, by the way? No. It took the food industry started actually to transform decades ago. But there is definitely a movement towards less becoming more. And the industry at all levels should be ready. So you saw that consumers in most countries realized that we're over purchasing and that there's a price for that. And this trend, this movement is being driven, I'll call it a movement, not a trend, is being driven by millennials, and it will be taken up by their children because they teach their children their values and how to behave. A very small point, the changes to the food industry were motivated by concerns for people's own health. And then also by concerns about the planet, whereas the conversion to sustainable textiles is driven by concerns about harm to the planet and to people making and to people using, wearing the products. The survey clearly demonstrated that people do want to behave responsibly in many ways. And they want to keep purchasing clothes and other textiles, but fewer and better textiles from a responsible textile industry. So I'm going to give you my advice, but I don't work in the industry. So again, for the second time, I'm going to say, I wish I could sit with all of you and hear what you have to say, what you're thinking, how you're reacting, what you would do. Here are some of my thoughts. So I don't think that this will be an easy conversion. With food, people know a little more about food than they know about clothes. Most people don't really know where clothing comes from, where textiles come from. So consumers are going to need help with that, and they're going to need help from the industry itself. One of the most striking things for me about this is that if there's going to be a move to quality being more important, consumers don't really know how to judge quality in clothing anymore. It's been de-emphasized now for decades with the more disposable clothing culture. So it will be incumbent on the trade to restore this, which to me means a really important dialogue between the trade and consumers to make sure that everybody is thinking the same way and to give the industry a chance to teach consumers. So one of the other things that occurred to me when thinking about teaching and helping consumers slowly over time adjust to a new way of thinking about their clothing is that we don't really have a language for sustainable clothing. The phrase eco-friendly clothing is going to be irrelevant very soon. It doesn't really mean a lot to people, but it's all we really have now. Conscious clothing, yes, perhaps. But until you can really start developing a vocabulary, a language for something, it's very hard to talk about it. It's very hard to watch awareness grow. So, and you can see I've made a reference to the Inuit, the Eskimo people of the far north. They have a lot of different words for snow because it's important to their survival. And it's the same thing here. We lack a vocabulary. In addition, brands and retailers are going to have to create the stories, the true stories behind this, the rationale for less becoming more in textiles, and that will affect the point of sale products. So what will the best practices be? What benefits, what attributes are you going to want to call out on hang tags or at the point of sale? What subjects will be most important for a deeper dive? For example, now consumers are interested in microbeads and in waste and in water use. And so what are you going to put on your websites? And just a little note that there have, we all know, been brands working on this extremely well for years, and they can become leaders in understanding how you communicate to consumers. Just a small point. I have a couple of clients who are working in enhanced textiles, and the developments in textile chemistry are quite wonderful and will be of great benefit to consumers, particularly when applied to this new athleisure. But just another note about communication in this regard. As yet, many consumers aren't aware of some of these developments. Also, they can be really confusing or even overwhelming to consumers when they learn about them because it's not been standardized. There's too many names, too many descriptors, too many claims. So again, this is a case where I would actually love to see the industry consolidating that language, creating standards to make it easier for consumers, and to mean that consumers and the trade will move together towards what I call a better textile life. So there are two areas where I think the language could be consolidated and normalized, and that is in terms of enhancement of features and sustainability. Another thing that I thought might be challenging is how do you really market if you're a larger box? retailer, or if you're in the supply chain selling to larger box retailers, how are you going to appeal to millennials who really like authenticity, purity, this curated shopping experience in that environment? And again, millennials are at the center of this because they really need a lot of changes of not changes of wardrobe, I mean throughout the day, but they're going to need wardrobes for their kids, new wardrobes. So my suggestion is to take supermarkets as a model, because supermarkets have really changed in North America, and they've managed to inject what we can call small batch, curated, artisanal, etc., values into a supermarket setting by, as you can see in the picture at the top, they're creating separate kind of artisanal areas that away from the mass market products that have a different merchandising approach. They're actually bringing in some very well established, truly artisanal, authentic brands. They're showcasing the items that are more quality, thoughtful, curated, in the store and in their ads, and they're being more transparent and traceable. And it's really quite interesting how many food advertisements in North America say, here are our farmers, this is exactly the farm where our food comes from. Some of the hugest brands are doing this, and even cranberry juice, you can see two farmers standing in their cranberries. I'm not sure that those are the real farmers, but usually they are. So of course, this does have implications for the clothing industry. Why? Building trust. Nowadays, consumers have become very skeptical. They don't necessarily believe claims, and this is particularly true of millennials, so that when they see claims like natural or organic on food, or if they say, and we measured this in the survey, if they see packaging with the words eco-friendly or sustainable on things like clothes, they'll often say, prove it. I hear it again and again and again and again. So you can see about 7 in 10 millennials are checking claims like eco-friendly or sustainable on clothing and home textiles at least sometimes. And 1 in 3 are checking always or often. And that's not that far ahead of everybody. So people are saying that they check. In order to check, this validation, this raising of trust can come from two sources. One is a brand name and the other is a certification label. In the survey, we measured a lot about brands, and people really are interested in the values and sustainability practices of the brands. In fact, a majority say, particularly millennials, I'm interested in what the brands I buy are doing to be sustainable, even if they're not fully, quote unquote, green. And they say, I'm more likely to buy more from responsible brands, and I'm currently avoiding brands that are not acting responsibly. So brand name is very important. But checking sustainability claims can be time consuming and difficult. We heard that again and again and again. People wrote it in. I'd like to check, but it takes a lot of time and I don't even know where to look. So a certification label can quickly and easily reassure them that they're doing the right thing. Millennials on the right, the formatting's a bit off, but it says millennials have been raised with certified food, so they understand certification. Many people also uh, associate certified products with heightened quality. So a reliable certification label can quickly and easily reassure people that they're doing the right thing. Therefore, in an age of deconsumption, certification labels reassure people that the products they use are doing no or less harm. It gives them confidence, key to confidence, that they can consume textile products more responsibly. I like to call it a virtuous triangle of confidence in a more responsible textile world. And so the confidence is going to come from brands, from certifiers, and from consumers all working together. And you can see some of the things that people said. I won't take the time to read them, but you can see that they're starting to talk about making better purchase decisions to prevent damage that we've called. They mention the word trust very often. It stops me from buying clothes that aren't safe or that are produced in an irresponsible way. With the help of brands, retailers, and OEKO-TEX certification, consumers now and in the future can restore their trust and confidence in a responsible and changed textile industry as less starts becoming more. So now I am going to be silent and hear from Vanessa what some of your questions might be if you have questions.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation, Ellen. We have received a couple of questions from the audience, in fact. I'd like to start with one of them because a couple of people seem to be interested in the same thing. Namely, they asked whether the survey included the educational and financial background of the participants. In other words, what are the characteristics of the participants? Is there like a common thread that you could talk about? The particular interest was, or the thesis was, that it might make a huge difference whether you have a bigger buying power in the moment of answering these questions. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
I absolutely can. And that's a really excellent question. And of course, we have data about who the people were in each of the countries, overall, in each area. Every type of data you could wish for, we have it. I'll tell you why I haven't mentioned it. In terms of education and in terms of income, both play a role. But it can differ from country to country. And because I really only had 30 minutes, I went a little over time. I wanted to have more time for questions. I knew when I wrote this that there would really not be time to get into this aspect. I can perhaps write something about it, but let me explain in a nutshell. In many parts of the world, the desire to deconsume was articulated slightly more by people in middle to high income brackets and with middle to higher education. So there was a correlation to education to some degree. However, in some countries, and this applies to the United States, and this is fairly important. In the United States, the interest in textile sustainability was higher, in fact, among people with lower to middle incomes. And the reason, when we did the analysis, the reason was, first of all, you have a lot of millennials in that group because if they're earning money, they're not earning a lot of money, yes. But also, people, even in the US, a lot of people are nervous about harmful substances. And our conclusion was that people that are knowingly buying clothes that are less expensive are already worried that there might be some harm attached to them in terms of harmful substances and in terms of environmental impact.
Yeah.
But again, this is the reason that we didn't focus on this in this presentation, because that's a whole big subject. And thank you to people that asked.
Another question that we got is the following. A participant asks, how do you think time will change in favor or against it, textile industry, considering that consumers have or lose to judge the quality of fabric or textile in general?
Well, that's another great question, and that's a huge question, and that's why I focused on communication at the end, because they're going to have to be taught. But again, all I can say, I don't have a crystal ball. I have data, and I also have a lot of experience with both the textile and the food industries, which are both really important to this. So I say again, look at what happened in the food industry, particularly in North America, where it really was a question of people saying, we want this, help us out. They
Yeah.
said to the industry, they basically said, help us out, help us know how to buy better products and provide them. And I'm going to tell you that I was sitting in the US, and I had a woman in front of me who was actually crying because she said, I really want to be able to go to the supermarket, this is 10 years ago, and buy healthier things that my kids will enjoy. So it's really incumbent on the impetus might come from consumers, but the impetus is on the industry to not only provide those products, but to really teach people.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be complicated. Sorry. Yes. I think you have another question.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I just I think what I'd add here is probably that's exactly where the certifications play a huge role. No, that that could make it easier for people to just find their way through that whole textile jungle. Would you agree?
I agree completely, and thank you for saying it better than I did. That's why I ended with certification, because that is your seal of approval.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, a lot of people were writing in lots of stuff, and a lot of them said, who knew certification, they said, I buy certified clothes because I know that certified products are better quality. So that's the perception. So right away, if you have a certification label, it ups the perception of quality.
Sure.
For consumers.
Okay. I think we have time for one additional question. Somebody asked the following. So you've talked a lot about brands and retailers. Now, I'm a producer within the supply chain. How do these findings apply to me?
Yes, I love that question. Thank you, whoever asked that. And by the way, I've thrown up my contact information and Vanessa's, so you can contact us if you do have more questions. If you're a member of the supply chain that's not in the front line with consumers, this is still very important with you, because it's what consumers are looking for is integrity throughout the supply chain. They don't talk about it that way, but for example, with food, people can tell you what the ingredients are. People, with all of this, with the desire for food less processed or better textiles, they become interested in the ingredients. And we learned this from the survey. They're going to pay attention. They do start to pay attention now about what is actually in, what has been manufactured. So if you're producing yarn, if you're producing anything in the supply chain, you are part of a holistic product. And people want to look at that whole product, not just at what they see in the shelf increasingly. So you're really a part of this. So while you might not be communicating directly to consumers, you're part of it. And I think it's really important for everybody in the industry to hear what consumers have to say in this regard.
Sure. Okay, so thank you very much, Ellen. That's been a super insightful presentation you gave us. I'd also like to thank each of you for listening in. We will send a link to the recording in case you'd like to share the information with your colleagues or even listen to it again. And please, as Ellen already said, don't hesitate to contact us for further inquiries, any open questions you might have. We're looking forward to hearing you at our next webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you.